What's up everyone, Nader here. In this video, I'd like to go over a bunch of exercises together to get more practice with innerHTML as well as text content in the DOM in JavaScript together. Let's get right to the exercises. All right, so for this set of exercises, a follow-up to the video before where we looked at innerHTML and text content as one of our first ways to actually perform DOM manipulation. As I mentioned before, we're going to get into more complicated versions of DOM manipulation where we can actually, I actually shouldn't say complicated, I should say more proper versions, but a little bit more involved than just simply changing an innerHTML. But in order to really appreciate those and also understand the caveats and trade-offs between both these methods, it's important to actually learn both text content and innerHTML, hence more practice in this exercise video so that we can see how it works together in various circumstances. So as with other exercise videos, what I have here is 4 different exercises, a warm-up, as well as 3 exercises after that, getting progressively more challenging and involved. I have these on GitHub, so you can pull it from there or copy and paste it from there, or you can just pause the video and actually code this out. And then I'm going to give you a chance to actually try this out yourself, pause the video, and then come back and we can actually look at a potential solution together. So let's get started with a warm-up. So I'd like you to create an HTML document, right, an HTML file that has these different elements on it. Okay, so it has a head tag with a title in it that just has some text of your choosing. Then a body tag below that. And inside the body tag, I'd like you to have an H1 tag, so a header element. Put some text inside there as well. A div tag with a p tag nested inside of it. And then inside of that p tag, I would like you to add some text and then also add a span element within that nested p tag. Okay, so a bit of nesting going on with this div tag as well. Once you've done that and created that HTML file, I'd like you to open up your file in the browser like we've done in previous video and open up your DevTools alongside that file. Then inside the DevTools, I'd like you to use the methods that we've learned, so specifically innerHTML and text content, to change different values. So in this case, I'd like you to change the title tag to be something else. The text within the title tag to be something else, which will actually change the title at the top of your HTML page in your tab bar. And then what I'd like you to do once you have that working is change the innerHTML of the div tag to contain an article tag that has a nested p tag inside of it with some text inside. Okay, a bit more challenging. So give these a shot and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so to start, let me just create a new file here. I'll just call this, let's do warmup.html. And in here, I just got to switch back and forth 3 times. We want to create a head tag with a title in it. So to start, I'm going to do my where is it? Doc type HTML. I'm going to put an HTML tag in here. I'm going to put a head in there. I'm going to put a title in here as well. Inside the title, I'm just going to put Warmup Exercise. All right. Prettier likes to format this for me, so I'll change, I'll let that format it so I have a bit more space on the screen. Then I have a body tag. Inside there I have an H1, and inside the H1 I want to put some text inside, so I'm going to say welcome to the warm-up. You can put whatever text you like, you don't have to copy me. Then in here I'll put a div tag, not a dir tag, definitely a div tag. And inside of here, I mentioned we want a p tag with some text and then a span as well. So I'm going to put a p tag in here. I'm going to say monkeys are the best. And then I'm going to put a span tag in here as well. And then I'll put an emoji in here. Why not? My favorite animal there, monkeys, or a single monkey in this case. All right. So this is kind of our HTML document. I'll save that so it reformats. And then if I kind of right click this or find it in my Finder or Explorer, what I can do is just double click on that file and then it'll open up in my browser, in this case in Google Chrome. So I'm just going to zoom in a whole bunch for us here. I'm going to open my DevTools here on the side. And I'm going to just zoom in a whole bunch so that we can be super clear together with what we're actually looking at. So if you look in here, we have all of that stuff that we just coded out together, right? We have our HTML head, title, body, H1, div, p, and then some text and a span. So to start, what we want to do is we mentioned that we want to change the text, not change the text, sorry, that's the wrong thing I changed to. That's the next exercise. We want to change the title's text to be something else. So that's this text right here, the warm-up exercise text in my case, or whatever text you chose, which is what's showing up here in the very, very top of my screen. It's a bit small because I can't zoom in on that part, but it says warm-up exercise, right? That's a text inside the title tag. So we want to change that to be something else. So if I do document.querySelector and I grab the title tag, you can see that I grabbed that title. Now, we saw that if we want to change text, the best thing to do is actually use textContent. Technically, we can use innerHTML in this case as well, because we're not really changing or inserting any HTML code. So really either or will work, but I'm just going to use textContent in this one, just so that it's a bit more kind of semantic as to what we're doing. So I'm going to say this is, let's just say, another warm-up. Just to have something different in there. And when I press enter in here, I want you to watch here, if you can see this in the top where it says warm-up exercise, right? And then I'm going to switch back to the DOM, after to actually show you this change as well. But I'm going to count to 3. I'm going to ask you to watch this right up here. So 1, 2, and 3. There we go. So hopefully you saw, right, that this changed to another warm-up up here. And indeed, if I switch back to my Elements tab, you'll see that the title text has actually changed to be another warm-up. So that's pretty cool. So we actually reached into the DOM and changed this element, which is pretty awesome. Okay. So great. So next thing we want to do is change the inner HTML of the div tag to contain an article tag with a p tag inside of it with some text. So to be really clear, just to start, if we look at this div tag, we have a p tag in there with a span and some text. Okay. And we are saying, well, can we change it to contain an article tag with a p tag with some text? Okay. So let's see what we can do here. So I'm going to say, I'm also just going to mention that this is the only div tag in this document right now. So technically I can do document.querySelector and I can ask for the first div that comes back, and that's going to give me that div tag with the p tag with this stuff inside of it. Okay, so I'm just going to, keep pressing the wrong hotkeys here. There we go. The div tag is right there. So now if I say dot innerHTML, now you're probably wondering, why did I suddenly choose to do innerHTML instead of textContent, right? Well, if I want it to actually be a proper p tag or an article tag and a p tag in this case, right? We want an actual article tag, which is one of the new HTML5 tags, as well as a p tag. I can't do textContent. In fact, let me just show you what happens if I do textContent. I want this textContent to be equal to, so I'm just going to put it as a string, and inside the string, I'm going to put an article. I'm going to close the article. Okay. Then I want to put a p tag, and I'm going to close the p tag just so I don't forget. And then let's just say my article, right? And I'll just copy this so I don't have to do it again next time. I just did the wrong thing there. Copy, cut it by accident. And if I do this, I'd like you to watch really carefully what happens over here when I actually make this change. So what we want to see, really, if you think about it, is only the text my article in this case, right? But if I do this using textContent, let's see what happens. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so probably not what we want, right? This is literally interpreting those tags as part of the string. What we want is to these be parsed as HTML. So I'm going to redo this command, but instead of using textContent, I'm going to say innerHTML. Okay, and when we use this method and we provided a string that's actually a series of HTML tags, or also just a string in some cases too, what it can do is actually parse those HTML tags and turn them into actual DOM elements for us, and then actually recreate a proper DOM for us, which we'll see in a second. So what I want to happen here is actually insert an article tag with a p tag inside with the text my article inside of that. So let's try this out and see the difference. Watch this part right here on the left side while I count to 3. So 1, 2, and 3, and there we go. All right, so now all those tags have actually been properly parsed. And if I switch to my Elements tab, what you'll see is now inside this div, we have this article tag, which is what I just inserted. And inside of there, lo and behold, here is our p tag with my article inside as text. So that's pretty awesome, right? So definitely a difference between text content and innerHTML. As I mentioned, generally speaking, we'll see much better methods to actually do things instead of innerHTML, but as a quick and dirty solution, especially as you're practicing to really understand how things work, it's definitely useful to know. Once we get more advanced, you really only want to be using text content and other DOM methods that we're going to learn in order to do stuff like this with innerHTML. Okay, so let's check out the next exercise. All right, so for this one, similar thing. What I'd like you to do is create another HTML document that has a bunch of elements inside of it again. So it's going to have a head tag, a title tag with some text in it. It's going to have a body tag. Inside the body tag, we again want an H1 in there, put some text inside. I'd like you to add a comment with some text inside of it as well. Now, note that this is just like a regular HTML comment, right? Like the angle bracket, exclamation, dash, dash, that kind of comment. And then a p tag with some text inside of it right below the comment as well. Then when you're done that, I'd like you to open up this file in your browser and open up the DevTools, just like we did together on the side. And then I want you to answer these two questions. How would you change the text inside the p tag? This was a good warm up. Again, we kind of did this already, right? Then how would you change the comment nodes text? A little bit more challenging. Okay, so give that a shot and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so to start, I'll just create another file here. I'll call this exercise-1.html. And inside of here, I'll do doc type, I'll do HTML, I'll do a head. This is a bit of a faster way to do this, but I'll stick with this for now for at least a few more videos. And I'll just call this exercise1. And then I'll do a body, and then I'll do an H1. And inside the H1, I'll just say, welcome to exercise 1. And then what I wanted to do was add a comment. So I'm going to do that to add a comment. This is an actual comment. And I'll say, am I doing this right? Right? There's my comment. And then after that, I'll add a p tag and I'll just say, I really hope I am. Smiley face. Okay. Technically, we should be escaping, I think, weird characters like this. I don't actually know in this case. I think we should be skipping these, but we'll just go with that. Okay, so that's our exercise, right? Up until here, p tag with some text inside, comment, and an H1. So let's open this inside our DevTools, see how do we change the text inside the p tag, and then how we would change the text inside the comment node as well. So if I right click on this, reveal it in the Finder, and then double click on exercise1.html, that's going to open up here for me. I'm going to zoom in a super amount so that we can see that. I'll also open up my elements tag or tab over here, and it's already zoomed in, which is great. And take a look at that, right? So we have everything in here. We have our body, H1, comment, which doesn't show in the actual physical DOM here. And then I have my p tag as well. So let's start with the p tag because that's the slightly easier one. So if I switch back to my console, I can do document.querySelector. And I can probably say, let's just say, you know what, actually, let's get fancy. So I'll just show you two ways we can do this, and I'll show you a slightly fancier way, document.querySelector p. That'll get me the p tag. If I really want to get fancy here, since I know the p tag is the last element inside of my body, what I can also do, just so that we can get more practice with this, is document.body.lastElementChild. And you can see that I actually get the same p tag, right? Because it's the last element child. Be careful not to use last child, because that would probably give you a text node if your editor is inserting text new lines inside of it as well. So that's the last HTML element in our body. So I'll just go with that since we're referring to the same node in this case. So if I want to do that, dot innerHTML or inner text, right? Or I shouldn't say, you can technically use inner text, but I like to use text content because of some other reasons, which we went into a little bit in the previous video. I don't really want to spend the extra computational resources to actually figure out some of the CSS and hidden and things like that with inner text. Usually we're going to use text content just to change text, and innerHTML to actually format things as HTML. You can see that when I use text content here, I'm getting the actual text inside of that p tag, and I can actually write to it using the equal sign, and I can say, you definitely are sometimes when I look at words, I get really confused, and I'm just like, did I actually write that correctly? I hope I'm not the only one that feels that. Definitely. There we go. I knew there was something wrong with that word. You definitely are. And I press enter, and you can see that actually changed this text right here. Right? So that was very similar to the previous exercise that we saw. Technically, I can use innerHTML, right? Just to show you, I could have done innerHTML is equal to you definitely are, super awesome, just like that, right? And if I do that, I'll also change the actual text inside of here. And since there's no HTML tags in here, it won't actually change really anything with the DOM structure. It's just changing the actual text. And if there was HTML tags, it would actually be parsed as HTML text as well. So in this case, we can see that we have you definitely are, super awesome in this case, still inside the p tag. Now the question is, well, how do we grab this element right here, right? Let's actually work on grabbing it first, and then we'll see how we can actually change the text inside of it. So if I say document.body.children, what we'll see is that I don't get access to the comments tag, right? Because children only gives us HTML elements. So if you recall, we can do document.body.child nodes, because this counts as a node. We can also do like first node, last node, and we can kind of do a few other methods to actually walk through the DOM as we saw in the DOM navigation video. In this case, if I open up child nodes, what we'll see is our comment is actually right in here. Am I doing this right? There's a data property, which actually is a valid way to change this text. And if you were to try that, it would actually work. There's a node value, and then there's text content. I like to use text content because it's a little bit kind of in my brain. It's like, okay, text content for pretty much all the nodes, including the HTML ones. And then there's innerHTML for the HTML nodes. But some people like to use data as well. So I'll kind of show you both ways really quick. So if I come back to my elements, just to be super clear, we want this text inside of here. Am I doing this right to change? Okay. So if I come back in here and I do document, actually I'll just press up to grab this, and I want to grab the 1, 2, 3, 4th element, which is index 3. So notice if I grab index 3, I get the comment, right? And I can say dot text content is equal to did this work? Right? Sometimes I use double quotes, sometimes I use single quotes. I guess it's about how I'm feeling at that particular moment. So if I run this, let's see what happens. We won't see a change in the actual visible DOM here on the left-hand side that's rendered to the screen. But if I run this and I switch back to my Elements tab, what you'll see is that it indeed changed that comment, which is super awesome, right? So literally anything in the DOM, which is what we see over here, we can change, right, using these DOM methods in the DOM API, which is super cool. Now, if I do .data, which is one of the other properties we saw, we can also change it through this. We can say, did this work? Please say it did. And I'll be really excited about this. Oops. Oh no. Please say it did. And if I switch back to my elements, what we'll see is that also actually works to write to as a property, right? So again, not going to show up over here because these are only the HTML elements that are going to show up, but it does actually allow us to change the comments inside the DOM. Now, this is super valuable because a lot of frameworks, for example, actually use comments to delineate different parts of the DOM to kind of help with speeding up computation or figuring out kind of what parts are what for custom things. And we'll actually use this as well once we get to things like web components and things like that. So it definitely is very, very useful, even though you don't actually see it being visible here. There are a lot of behind the scenes things that you can do with this kind of tool. Okay, now that was exercise 1. Hope you found that one interesting. Let's take a look at exercise 2. Okay, so this one is a little bit tricky, so I'm going to kind of walk through this a bit slowly. I'd like you to create another HTML document, okay? And in this one, I kept it a bit shorter here to really only stick with what exactly we need. I'd like you to create a head tag that has a title with some text inside of it, as well as a script tag in the head as well. Then I want you to create a body tag with an H1 inside of it that says welcome. Okay. Now, inside of that script tag in the head, what I'd like you to do is use a set timeout. Okay. If you haven't seen this function before, I encourage you to pull up MDN to actually see how this works. This allows us to run a function after a certain period of time. So the first parameter to the function is a function that we want to run, and the second parameter is the amount of time in milliseconds to run that function after. MDN has some great examples on this to actually see how that works. So with set timeout, we want to set a 3-second timeout, so 3000 milliseconds. And what this function is going to do inside of set timeout is it's going to replace the entire body elements content with this right here, which is a nav element that has 3 LIs inside of it. Actually, I just realized that in this case there should be a UL element with 3 li tags with text inside of it, just like that. Okay, so we should have an unordered list with 3 li tags all wrapped within a nav element. Okay, this is traditionally how you would create a nav bar. All right, so you can put any text in there, but just to give you an idea of what some example text you can put is like one li could be home, one could be shop, and one could be about, for example. Okay. Now, what you want to do is after you have this written, I'd like you to open the file in your browser and watch the HTML change to this new content. So specifically from the welcome tag to this new nav tag with the UL and the LI tags after 3 seconds. Then I'd like you to open up your browser console tab and actually watch it change inside the elements tab inside the actual DevTools. Refresh the page, watch it work, and see if the DOM actually change as you're working through it. Okay, super awesome to see this work. I encourage you to give that a shot and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so to start, I'm just going to create an exercise-2.html. And I'm going to put my doc type, HTML. I'm going to put my head. Inside my head, I'm going to have my title, and I'm going to say set timeout example. Then after this, I'm going to put my script tag. I'll put my script in here in a second. And inside of here, I'm going to have my body, an h1 tag, and I'm just going to say welcome. Okay. Now inside the script, what I mentioned is I just want to do a set timeout. Okay. Now set timeout takes 2 arguments. The first argument is a function traditionally written like this, or you can pass in an actual handle to the function. But since this is a shorter function, I'm just going to write it like this. And I'm going to say 3000 for the second argument, which is the amount of milliseconds after which to run the first argument, which is the function. Okay, so it's going to say run this function after 3 seconds. Now, in this function, what we want to do is we want to change the body's HTML to be something else, right? So how do we do that? Well, we know that we can do document.body.innerHTML equal to something, right? Equal to what? Well, I'm just going to use a new line here so it doesn't go off the screen. In this case, it's going to equal to, well, we want a nav, right? And then we want to close the nav. So I'll just do that. And I can't actually do this on multiple lines unless I use a template string. So I can do nav like that. And then inside of the nav, I want to do a UL. And then I want to close the UL, right? And then inside of here, I want to do an LI. And I'm going to close the LI, right? And I'm going to clone this LI 3 times so I can have 3 things inside of there. The first, as I mentioned, is going to be home, and then shop, and then about. So I'm going to do home, and then I'm going to do shop, and then I'm going to do about for the last one. Okay, so I'm going to save this. It's going to probably reformat really quick. There we go. So if we read this, right, what we're saying is right now document.body is going to have welcome in it. But then as soon as this page loads, we're going to create a timeout because this script is going to run. And this is going to run after 3 seconds. It's going to change the body's inner HTML to be this string instead. And this is going to be parsed as HTML because it's using inner HTML, not text content. And this is going to put a nav element with a UL element with 3 LI elements inside the DOM that's going to completely erase what's in the body as soon as this runs with this set of elements. Okay, Now, let me open up my Finder again, and I'm going to open this up for the first time. Watch what happens on the left side of the screen after 3 seconds. I'm going to try to zoom in so you get a chance to see it, but then I'll refresh the page as well. All right, so let's open this. All right, there we go. I'm going to zoom in, watch it change, and there we go. All right, so let me open up my inspector again, not the source, that's the source of the page, inspector. And I'm just going to keep these open here so that we can actually see what's happening. In this case, actually, it's probably going to change slightly. So I'm going to refresh the page, and then after 3 seconds, you can see that the nav actually opens up, okay? I'm going to try that one more time just so you can see, right? So watch both over here and over here. First, we're going to see an H1, and it's going to get replaced entirely with this nav section. So I'm going to refresh. There's the H1, which is popping up. And then after 3 seconds, boom, in comes our nav with those LIs inside of it, right? Now that is pretty awesome. So there's a lot going on, right? In this example, if you think about it. We have a timeout running as soon as the page loads, and then it's set up to parse this string, create all those elements, find the body and replace the body's inner HTML, take out that H1 and then put in all of these elements in the correct order in their correct tree, which is quite a lot. If there was also any styling involved in this, which we're going to get into in future videos, those would all need to be applied as well, which also adds even more stuff that it would need to do. So a lot of stuff is happening behind the scenes, and we'll get more appreciation for this as we walk through the DOM videos together. But that's definitely pretty cool. I hope you found that one interesting. Cool. Let's take a look at the last exercise for this video. So exercise number 3. Again, I'd like you to create an HTML document that has the following elements. In this case, a head tag with a title with some text, and then a body tag with an H1 tag with some text inside of it as well. Then what I'd like you to do is go to MDN, preferably, or Google, and look up how the outerHTML method works on an element in the DOM. So far, what we've been looking at is the innerHTML method. Now, you can probably kind of intuit what outerHTML means, but I encourage you to actually pull up the documentation and read it up because it definitely has some cool examples in there, and it'll get you thinking about some stuff that you can do. Then what I want you to do is open up the file in your browser and open up the DevTools alongside it, and inside the console, what I'd like you to do is figure out how to replace the H1 tag with an H2 tag, but preserve the original text inside of the H1 tag. Okay, and I want you to do this using the outerHTML method. Okay, so definitely, I'm kind of combining a few things here. I want you to keep the text inside of the H1 tag previously, and then basically just change it to an H2 tag. All right, so pretty tricky. I'd like you to give this a shot, and then we'll go through it together. All right, so to start, let's pull up the documentation for this. So I'm going to go to Google, and I'm going to just search for outerHTML. And here we go. We have our MDN, which is my favorite documentation, elements.outerHTML. I'm going to click on that. I'll zoom in a little bit here. So it says the outerHTML attribute of an element DOM interface gets the serialized HTML fragment describing the blah, 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 blah. It can also be set to replace the element with the nodes parsed from the given string. All right, so this second sentence kind of makes sense. A lot of this is a little bit hard to read. Let's see, the value, that's fine. Examples. Okay, so it's saying that if we have this div, and then we grab get element by ID, the D, so we're grabbing the div, we can log the outerHTML, which will actually give us all of this string, including the div in this case, right? So notice that if we did innerHTML in this case, we would only get the P tags, right? But if we did outerHTML, we'd also grab the tag that we're actually asking about as well, which is the actual div tag in this case. Okay, so that's really what they're saying here. It can be also set to replace the element with the nodes parsed from the given string. Technically, it gets the serialized HTML fragment describing the element, including its descendants. So a kind of English way to read this, without getting too fancy with the terminology, even though MDN is usually pretty good at this, is it basically gives us a string representation in this case, which is kind of what they're meaning when they're saying serialized HTML fragment, and it's going to give us the actual element that we're interested in, as well as its entire subtree, which is what they're referring to when they say the descendants. Okay, so the element itself that we're interested in, plus all of the elements nested inside of it, as opposed to innerHTML, which only gives us the ladder, which is all the elements inside of the element. So let's take a look at how this actually works. So let's start by actually creating our HTML element in VS Code. I'm going to say exercise-3.html. So I'm going to do my doc type, my HTML, my head, my title, and I'll just say exercise 3. And then in here, I'm going to have my body, I'm going to have an H1. And I think I just want to put some text inside of here. I'm going to say, this is testing outer HTML. Great, there we go. And I'm going to open this up in my browser. I'm going to super zoom in here, very large, and open up my terminal as well. And we can see that in here we have our H1 tag. Okay, now check this out, right? If I do document dot query selector, and I ask for the H1, I'm going to grab this element. Okay, so keep in mind, this is the elements that we're working with. Now, if I take that element and I ask for the innerHTML, in this case, there's no HTML inside of it. There's only text inside of it. So I get the text inside of that element that I'm asking about. In this case, the query selector H1 element, which is the actual H1 in this case. But if I change innerHTML to outerHTML, notice the difference. I actually get the surrounding tag and any attributes it might have as well. So this kind of makes sense if you think about it, right? Inner is inside, outer is including the element itself. There might be some confusion. Technically, you could say outer includes other things, but in this case, we're grabbing the tag and the attributes of the actual element plus all of its descendants as well. That's the main difference between these two. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's think about how can we actually use this to change this tag to be an H2. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable. Okay, so I'm going to say const text, I'll just say H1 text is equal to document. I like how I say document and I write query selector, dot query selector of our H1, right? Dot text content. Okay, so if I do H1 text, we're going to grab that text right there, right? Now what I can do is I can say document dot query selector. And there are many ways to do this. I just want to get practice with outerHTML just so you can see the difference. And I'm going to say H1, right? And I want to say I want the outerHTML of this to be something different because we can actually write to this as well. So in this case, I want the outerHTML to be what? I'm going to give this a template string so I can actually interpolate my H1 text inside of this. So I want this to be changed to an H2 tag. But inside of this H2 tag, I want to put something. I want to put this H1 text, right? So what I'm saying is, please change this element's outerHTML to be this string. This string is going to evaluate to H2 of this is testing outerHTML and then closing H2, which is going to be parsed by the browser as an heading to tag and then put into that element's slot instead. So let's watch this closely. In this case, the main difference is that this text is going to be smaller because by default, without styling, heading 2 is slightly smaller than an H1. We'll also prove this by looking at the Elements tab. So 1, 2, and 3. And there we go. That became slightly smaller. You can notice that we actually evaluated that and got our H2 back. And if I go back to my Elements tab, you'll see that this has now been changed to an H2 element in the actual DOM. So we can use this to really change it to anything that we want, just to show you that how this works, and it's really powerful. Now, again, very similar to innerHTML, there's a lot of issues with this, and generally we don't really want to be using this unless we really know what we're doing and we can be absolutely certain that this is secure text. But But it is useful to know that this exists because there are cases where it does become quite useful and valuable, even though we can replace this with many other better and more modern ways of actually doing this as we learn more about the DOM together. So I hope you found these exercises valuable. They were a lot of fun to make and go through together. If you did, I'd love it if you could like the channel and like the video and subscribe to the channel. Oh my goodness, I'm all over the place today. And in the next video, what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually go over what I mentioned in this video a little bit, which was the attributes, right? We haven't really been playing around with attributes too much yet. Specifically things like ID and class is what we've been looking at, but there are really many different attributes and even custom attributes that we can set for elements. And this can be an extremely powerful tool. In fact, frameworks actually use this quite a lot depending on the framework that you use. And we can really go quite far, especially once we use these with things like web components as we learn those in the future in this series. So I can't wait to get to that topic. I'll see you in that one. See you later.